And you seem to be claiming that they may have a greater influence than the two men most people would cite when we talk about the people who changed the way we see the world, Marx and Freud.
I think that's true now. I think one of the truths about the last 20 years is that the Marxist model has proven to be a moral failure. And the Freudian model, long, complicated question to have, but certainly the majority of cognitive psychologists now certainly would agree, has been an empirical failure. Whereas Darwin's ideas have never been more potent or more widely accepted or more generative for new work in the sciences than they are now. And certainly Lincoln's example of the possibility of a fighting liberalism, a liberalism for good or ill, that manages to defend itself and propagate itself, is certainly a living idea.
As we discovered after Barack Obama was elected, and we saw as many pictures of Lincoln as we saw of Barack Obama.
Yes, it's hard to think of another historical figure who could be that contemporary or called on for contemporary examples as Lincoln is now.
Did Darwin and Lincoln's shared birthday inspire you to explore their lives together, or was it just a lucky coincidence that you came across in your research?
To be completely truthful, I was fascinated by both men. I'd written an essay for The New Yorker about Darwin as a natural novelist, Darwin as a writer, and then I wrote something about the Angels and Ages dispute, which is also about language, really about words and how they affect minds. And then I discovered the common birthday, and I thought, well, this is an occasion to put it together, not to demonstrate mystic parallels between these two lives, none exist, but as a way of writing a meditation on their legacy to us, what they've given us.
Well, but you say that what they do have in common and their greatest influence is in revolutionizing the way in which ideas are communicated.
Yeah, I think,
how had they been communicated previously?
I think that if you think about Darwin, for instance, Darwin's On the Origin of Species, when it's published in 1859, is one of the first, if not the very first, and certainly still distinctly powerful as a major work of scientific investigation research, which is also a popular book. It's published as a popular book. Darwin never publishes it as an expert book for expert readers. The first edition of Origin of Species, which contains his idea and his argument for it, is published for a broad audience and sells out on the first morning. That's a real transformation in the way we think about who science is addressed to and where it belongs. And that idea that not only is it important to have a strong idea, but it's important to communicate it to as large an audience as you can, that's a modern idea.
But not just ideas. You say they use their simple building blocks in the way they lay out their ideas to evoke large ideals.
Yes, I think that's true. I think that there's a set of moral consciousness, a set of values that runs through both of their work, and I think that that's crucial to it. We don't see it. Darwin's not a polemicist, and he's not an evangelist for a particular set of morals.
Did Darwin actually set out to change the way you wrote a book about science or scientific theory?
I don't know how self-conscious it was. It certainly seemed natural for him to write it that way. Remember, he had written his account of the Voyage of the Beagle. It was a successful book, and I think it became natural for him, intuitive, just in the same way that for Lincoln, the way you communicated ideas was by making speeches. That was part of his role, who he was.
He must have understood how threatening the theory of evolution would be to many people. Do you think that affected the way he built his argument?
I do. It's one of the fascinating questions in the history of ideas. Why did Darwin delay? He really has this idea in 1838, doesn't publish it.
For 20 years.
For 1859, that's right. And certainly he was a sensitive man who didn't like being at the center of controversy. His wife was all her life a believing Christian, and he didn't want to hurt her. I think Darwin's desire, in a funny way, Leonard, to avoid a fight, gives, On the Origin of Species, a very special explanatory, pleading, come along with me tone. Not a, I'll tell you the truth and the hell with you, but please, if you just follow me, you'll see that this is a good idea and it needn't threaten values you hold dear.
You're right that Darwin made dog breeders and pigeon owners the peers of scientists.
Yes, that's right.
To make it more accessible to people?
To prove his idea, and then I think to make it more eloquent and accessible to people. He had his great idea, but he knew that the great idea was valueless without evidence to show it. And he loved evidence from the near at hand, from things that we already know. So he would say, in effect, look, you accept that dog breeders can take big woofy dogs and turn them into small yappy dogs just by a process of artificial selection. And you say, yes, and he knew a great deal about it. He learned a lot about it. And he said, well, if you accept that, then why not accept that given an immeasurably long span of time, nature can make natural selection do the same kind of work?
And he he structured his argument in a way that you say kind of shapes the modern way of thinking.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a
Did
way
we
that
really see a break?
A break between what and what?
Before and after?
I don't. History doesn't work in big fractures, and there's continuities connect things as much as breaks do. But yes, I certainly think that Darwin not only reshapes biology, but he reshapes our expectations of the way we can talk about biology. It's one of the reasons, Leonard, that we see every day another book of popular evolutionary biology is published, Steve Pinker or Richard Dawkins, someone else, and those books are read and cherished, and educated people feel an obligation to understand those ideas.
Well, there were other people who were starting to come up with similar ideas, and it's one of the reasons I gathered that he eventually published on The Origin of Species. We should also assume that if Lincoln hadn't ended slavery, another president would have had to eventually, because slavery was just too divisive in this country. So there's something else that's going on here. The reason that we remember these men is not just because of their accomplishment, but because of the way they accomplished it.
Exactly so. I mean, Gregor Mendel came up with a theory of genetics, which in a certain ways is as big an idea as Darwin's idea, but we don't talk about Mendelism in the same way we talk about Darwinism, because it's not tied to a kind of humanism the way Darwin's is. And in the same way, yeah, it's certainly true, inevitably true, that slavery would have ended without Lincoln. But Lincoln gives us a set of words that, as the Obama moment shows, we still resonate to. So the words with both these men are not ornament or embroidery. They're at the very core of what they're doing.